Hi, I'm Gilbert Gottfried. This is Gilbert Gottfried's amazing Colossal podcast with my I was going to say with my roommate.
Go ahead if it
okay, with
makes you happy.
With my room. With my life partner, Frank Santo.
It's a Brando Wally Cox thing.
Frank Santo Padre. We're once again shooting at Nutmeg with our engineer, Frank.
Are we shooting? I think we're recording.
Fuck it all. I made 10 mistakes with 3 sentences. Okay, our guest this week is a prolific and popular actor, writer, comedian, producer, and director, and one of the most inventive and original comedy minds of his generation. You've seen him in films that include Stripes, Rat Race, Coneheads, Boris and Natasha, The Experts, Sesame Street's Follow That Bird, and Strange Brew, which he co-wrote and co-directed with his longtime friend and colleague Rick Moranis. You've also seen and heard his work on hit TV shows like The Simpsons, King of the Hill, That 70s Show, Saturday Night Live, Weeds, Arrested Development, Primetime Glick, How I Met Your Mother, and Grace Under Fire. He's also scripted episodes of critically acclaimed series like Bones and The Blacklist. For 5 seasons, he was one of the writers and stars of the influential and much-admired sketch comedy show SCTV, breathing life into such memorable characters as Bill Needle, Tex Boyle, Angus Crock, Harvey Keitel, and, of course, one half of the beloved beer-swilling siblings, the Mackenzie brothers. You want more from the guy? Fine. He's also won 2 Primetime Emmys, a Sports Emmy, a Grammy, a People's Choice Award, and a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Academy of Canadian Film and Television. In a long and distinguished career in show business, he's worked with Henry Fonda, Mel Blanc, Bob and Ray, Bill Murray, Martin Short, John Cleese, Steve Martin, Max von Sydow, and Richard Pryor, as well as former podcast guests Chevy Chase, Buck Henry, Paul Dooley, David Steinberg, and Paul Schaefer. Please welcome to the podcast a performer of multiple talents and a man who once played Bob Hope's nephew, Chester Hope, our pal, Dave Thomas.
Thank you very much. What a long and drawn-out intro. I just feel so old now.
Yeah, I always feel like these intros should be followed with "Found dead in his Los Angeles apartment."
Yes, absolutely.
It's a little like This Is Your Life, Dave, without the school teachers showing up.
Now we started to talk about something before we went on the air.
I don't know how long ago this is. This is probably 20 years. But there was a thing in Toronto, which I only went to because I'm not a stand-up. I did, sketch comedy, but I was never a stand-up. But I would get invited to stand-ups because a lot of people that ran these things didn't know I wasn't a stand-up. And if I could get a free plane ride somewhere and not really have to do anything or embarrass myself, then I would say yes. So I said yes to this thing, and I said, but I can't go on the dais because I'm not a stand-up. Oh, don't worry, we don't need you to go on the dais. So Joe Piscopo was the host. Now
I'm laughing already.
Joe Piscopo always made me laugh, and he made me laugh for all the wrong reasons. And I remember when I did SNL as a guest host with Rick, Piscopo was in the cast with Eddie Murphy. There's a little restaurant just catty corner to the Brill Building in New York, an Italian place, and it had a little kind of a vestibule where you go in before you get to the restaurant and you can hang your coat. And there's photos of all the stars there. And there's a photo of Joe Piscopo as Frank. And then it's to Tony, or whoever the owner of the restaurant was. To Tony, you are a kooky guy. Love Joe Piscopo. And then in brackets, almost Frank. When I saw that, I almost threw up in the vestibule, you know? So, cut to Toronto. You're there, Gilbert.
Yes.
I'm there. I took a free plane ride. Joe Piscopo's the MC. He starts by taking a boombox and putting it on the dais. And he goes, you know, wherever I go all over the world, you know, people always come up to me and they say, Joe, do your Frank. So without any further ado, and he hits the boombox and you are the sunshine of my life, whatever it was he was singing. And, you know, for about 8 or 10 bars, it's not bad. But because Joe is never satisfied with something that's just good, he has to go and make it just a pile of shit. And so it turned into a really horrible impersonation of Frank. And then other comedians got up. Then you get up and you go, Friends of Earth. I don't know. What is Friends of Earth? I guess I'm a friend of Earth. I don't know. I mean, the way I see it is, you know, Earth, wherever it goes throughout the galaxy, people always say to Earth, Earth, do your Frank. I'm paraphrasing it, but it was just boom, bada boom, bada ba. You just nailed him so well. And everybody on the dais just died. And so there's two kinds of comedy. You know, they say, you know, there's the kind of comedy that's pointless and just kind of silly. And then there's the kind of comedy that's really like, you know, a baseball bat. And that was one of those baseball bat jokes that I love.
What's the other Gilbert story, Dave? When we were on the phone, you said you said you had 2 Gilbert stories.
And I remember at the Friends of Earth, I think Jim Carrey and Mike Myers were there too, and Henny Youngman.
Yep. But none of them were anywhere near as memorable to me as the Friends of Earth on Joe Piscopo. The other time we met, Gilbert, was, you know, as you were listing all the crazy and insane things I've done, I directed a movie for Paramount, and I inherited John Travolta as a cast member. I didn't choose him as a director. He came with the package. And it was one of those things your agent said, no, Dave, you got to do this. You want to be a director. You're going to do this. I wasn't even sure I wanted to be a director. Anyway, I directed them. And he needed a sidekick. And you came in and read with Travolta as the sidekick in this movie called The Experts.
Oh, yes.
And your memory of this, Gil?
I do.
It was a hilarious mismatch. I wished God I had the tape. It was just, there is no way that Gilbert Gottfried could be John Travolta's partner in this movie. Boy, was it funny. God.
I remember flying out to L.A. to read for that. And I found myself sitting next to Mike Nesmith from the Monkees. And,
Really?
yeah. And I take out the script, and I'm, like, leafing through it, and he goes, what you reading? And I said, oh, it's this movie, The Experts. It's about these Russian spies who kidnapped 2 Americans to teach them American hip culture. And Mike Nesmith, without changing his facial expression, goes, sounds like a piece of shit.
Well, That's what the audience thought too, because it went straight to video. So there you go. Maybe Nesbitt's not as stupid as we think. You know?
But I did get a chance to dance with Travolta.
Oh yes, you didn't you?
Look Who's Talking Too.
Yeah. Yes, I remember that.
And Dave introduced John to his wife on that film, to Kelly Preston.
Yes.
Yeah.
I did do
so something good came of it for him.
Oh, for sure.
Now, this is an interesting comment that you made, Dave, and you're talking about the different kinds of comedy when you're talking about Piscopo. What did you mean when you said you think comedy is a disorder as opposed to a talent? I found that fascinating.
Well, one of the things I've done over the years, like I was the head writer for SCTV, so I was the guy that would bring in the writers and hire the writers, and that was my introduction to finding out what comedy writers and what comedy people were like, because I'd never really thought about it.
Mm-hmm.
And as it turns out, if somebody walked in and they're like a handsome-looking jock, it's just like, okay, forget it. This person isn't going to be funny. They have to be really short, they have to be really ugly, they have to be really fat, or they have to have some kind of messed up childhood that caused them to be funny. I don't believe being funny is a talent. I think it's a disorder. And I think that, handsome people can develop or have a talent or be. No, I don't think they can. I'm sorry. I don't think it's possible to be really funny unless something wrong. Look, all the people in my cast in Second City, they were all messed up in some way. And so that's my theory.
It's like that story when Redford, they considered Redford for The Graduate. It's that story you mentioned on the show.
Yeah, it was, I'd like, when they were making The Graduate into a movie, the studio wanted Robert Redford. And Mike Nichols met with Robert Redford, and he said, "Have you ever not gotten laid?" And Robert Redford said, "What do you mean?" And Mike Nichols said, "That's it, I'm getting Dustin Hoffman."
A similar principle.
That's great.
And I know whenever I see, like, a handsome guy or a really pretty girl, there's a comedian, I always am extra suspicious.
And you're usually right, I bet.
Yeah.
That, listen to them for a little while. And now there are plenty of exceptions, too. There are a lot of homely and ugly and messed up people aren't funny.
Tell us about your dad introducing you to comedy, Dave, and the stuff that he used. Because your dad was a philosopher. He wasn't in show business, but he was a comedy buff.
Yeah, he was. Yeah. I was born in Canada, but we moved to Durham when I was 6, North Carolina. And my dad was at Duke. And so at that age, it started. And it was like Andy Griffith Records, before Andy Griffith did, No Time for Sergeants, let alone Mayberry. He was a stand-up and he had records. And his jokes were like, they were like stuff that we did as a family. We would drive down to Florida on US Route 1, and he did it with his hillbilly family. And, there were jokes that he did that became kind of family jokes. They were where, he says, we're driving along US 1 and we saw this sign, free picnic tables 1 mile. I said, let's stop and get us one. And then he buttons it with, we kind of wish we had waited till we was on the way back, being as it was made of concrete and all. Well, okay. So there's those kind of those rural Southern jokes. And and then my parents were both British. So then he would get Goon Show records, and it was an introduction to, Spike Milligan and Peter Sellers. My dad was a huge Jonathan Winters fan when he was very early in his career. Tom Lehrer.
Oh, great.
Spike Jones musical stuff that he used to do. So he was always playing these records, and he would just be dying. He would just be laughing his ass off. And the best thing you could do in our house is make Dad laugh. That would be like the prize.
Uh-huh.
And so that's how I got into it, was, being kind of tutored and schooled with comedy, and my dad being a real comedy buff. And so, yeah, that's it, really. That's the end of my story.
But you went into advertising first, which Gilbert and I found kind of fascinating.
No, I didn't do that because I was an ad man, that I just wanted to be an ad man. I was in Godspell.
Oh, that's right.
And after Godspell, I couldn't get a job as an actor. That was my first gig. And I went around, and the only thing I got was a commercial for Ontario Hydro, where I played a guy, MOS, no dialogue, who pushed a sailboat into a high, it was for Ontario Hydro. I pushed a sailboat into some overhead wires and got electrocuted. And that was my one job after Godspell. A year went by and I didn't get a job, and I thought, screw this. I'm not going to be a waiter who says he's in showbiz. So I had been editor of the student paper. I went back to my college and I made up a bunch of fake ads. And then I went to the Yellow Pages in the Toronto phone book. And I just started phoning ad agencies alphabetically and trying to get interviews. And by the time I got to the M's at McCann Erickson, I got hired.
That's great.
And then inside there, it became like a whole ad career because I got lucky. I did some spots and I was really, audacious, I guess, ballsy. Like I don't ever say you can't do anything. If they ask you, can you do something? You say, yeah. And I wrote this, they put me on as a junior writer on the Coca-Cola account, which meant I did all the retail stuff. And these are like basically print ads for newspapers and things like that. And at that particular time, Coke and Pepsi were in a bottling war where they kept going and doing different molds of the bottles to make the bottles taller, so that in the store people would go, oh, look, that one's bigger. I'm going to get that one. And so the ads and the creativity there is really limited. But one of the things I got asked to do was a contest commercial where they would, get under the cap of Coca-Cola. There'd be like a thing, and if you got lucky, you'd win. So there was a TV commercial that was part of that. So I wrote a TV commercial, and they gave me 28 and a half seconds of legal copy for a 30-second spot, which is like, oh, what the hell am I going to do with this? So then I thought, oh, I remember that old weatherman bit that Don Knotts used to do on the Tonight Show, the early Tonight Show with Steve Allen. And the breakaway pointers, too much information, too much data. So I made the 28 and a half seconds of legal copy that I had that was the bit. That became the bit that the guy had to give all this information. He couldn't do it all. And so I went into the creative director and pitched this, and he said, you can't write this and send that to Coca-Cola. They're not even going to get it. You have to go up there and pitch it. So, all right. So I went up to the head offices and pitched it. And then they liked it. And they said, who do you see doing this? And I said, Tim Conway. With, just I pulled the name out of a hat. And a week or 2 weeks later, I was on a plane to LA to shoot this spot with Tim Conway. And it was like, holy shit. So
instant gratification.
And then I got put onto then I ended up doing more TV stuff for Coca-Cola, and they fired the girl who was head writer. And then I did one spot that got the attention of this guy in New York who was creative director at McCann. His name is Bill Backer.
We talked about him on this show. He was kind of a legend.
Of course, he thought if things go better with Coke, it's the real thing Coke. And that mountaintop commercial, I'd like to buy the world, that was his spot.
Yeah, he passed away last year.
Yeah. So he saw one of my spots. He said, I want to meet that kid. Get him on a plane, get him down here. So I went down to New York. And I go into his office. It's on Lexington Avenue. It's a corner office, and he's got a grand piano and he's this little guy in a gray suit with a bow tie. And he's sitting in his office, and I walk in, and he says, I'm Bill Backer. And I say, I'm Dave Thomas. Sit down. And he starts quoting Shakespeare. Now, I had just done a master's degree in English Lit, and I'm thinking, what the hell is he quoting Shakespeare for? What is this guy's game? but he started quoting stuff, and I thought, all right, well, I'll quote stuff back. So I quoted Shakespeare back. Well, that was my ticket. It was like the stupidest thing, but that is how I won him over. Then he says to me, "Hey, I want you to come up. Have you ever written a jingle?" And I went, "Yes." I hadn't, lying, of course. And he said, "I want you to write a jingle, and I want to keep it simple. Keep this." I wrote this jingle, and then they put me on a plane to go to England and shoot with these kids. And then I was on a roll in advertising, mostly by luck. A lot of these things are luck and timing. And so then I hear they're opening Second City in Toronto. That was the gig I wanted. And I missed the first one because of stuff I was doing in advertising. But the second time that it opened, because the first one failed because they couldn't get a liquor license. The second time it opened, they were having auditions, and I went, auditioned, and got it. And then I quit. I went in to see my boss, and I said, I'm leaving. And he said, what are you doing? I said, I'm going to go do Second City. And he said, how much are you making? I said, $145 a week. By this time, I was making like 50, 60 grand or something like that in advertising, which was good for a single guy. And he said, you're crazy. And he said, look, go there, do it for a year and get it out of your system. And if you want to come back here in a year or 2 years, we'll give you your job back. So that's how I got into advertising. I guess a shorter version of that would have been something that you probably would have rather had than my long one.
No, we got the time, Dave.
I don't know how to edit.
We got the time.
And good luck getting the knife in there, because I talk like a politician.
And how much were you making with Second City?
$145 a week.
Big come down.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah.
Big bucks.
And who was in Second City at the time?
Dan Aykroyd, Catherine O'Hara, Eugene Levy, Joe Flaherty,
Brian Doyle Murray,
Gil Radner. No, he had gone. He was in the earlier one that closed because they couldn't get a liquor license.
I see.
In Toronto. And then this was 74 and 75. Lawrence started recruiting for SNL, and Gilda went first, and then he hired Belushi, and then Danny was going to go down. But I worked with Danny backstage, and we ended up augmenting our $145 a week because he heard I was in advertising, and he said, David, couldn't we do some retail stuff? There's a way we could, do radio spots for that wacky audio guy on Yonge Street and maybe some other guy. And I said, yeah, sure. Let's. He said, well, how much do you get? I said, I know that for the freelance spots when I was at McCann, it's like $1,000 a spot. So that was big money to us. So we went, let's do it. So we started writing spots, and we were doing a lot of those radio spots together.
So you were writing ads by day to make a little money to supplement that income. Obviously, you needed a couple of bucks, and you were doing Second City how many nights a week?
6 nights a week.
6 nights a week, Jesus. And you and Aykroyd had a thing going before he got before Belushi managed to succeeded in pulling him to New York. Didn't he used to say, "Come to the big stage"?
That was Belushi.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Belushi was trying to convince Danny to come to New York. And Danny was like, I don't know. You don't even like.
I never saw anybody do Dan Aykroyd before.
I know, because his laugh. I love his laugh. It's so. Belushi said to him, Danny, come to Rome, and Danny got it. What that meant is, when you're in Toronto and you're in these little satellite Detroit and these satellite cities. That's not where the arena is. It's like in the movie Gladiator with Russell Crowe. He's like, you play the provinces, but you're not doing anything till you're in the Circus Maximus. You got to go to Rome. And I thought it was a cool thing that Belushi said to Danny.
Yeah. So he went into New York. He got sucked in. You stayed put with who was in that cast? Who was left? Oh, Catherine O'Hara was there. You started working with Catherine.
Catherine was there. Andrea Martin was there.
Andrea Martin.
Marty Short joined later. That we were all in Toronto after Godspell, hanging around, trying to get work, and thank God Second City came to Toronto, because I don't know what I would have done. I probably would have stayed in advertising, you know?
And Paul was the musical director in that Godspell production.
Oh.
Paul Schaefer.
Yeah. Yeah, he was. And when I went down to New York to work with Bill Backer, Paul was doing the Lampoon show.
Oh, Lemmings.
Right. No, not Lemmings, the Radio Hour.
Oh, the Radio Hour. Radio Dinner.
Yeah. And it was with Brian Doyle Murray and Joe Flaherty and Bill Murray and Belushi and oh shit, the guy that did the movies with Eugene Levy.
I can't think of his name.
Chris Guest.
Right, Chris Guest.
Chris Guest. So there was a hell of a cast down there doing that stuff. So there was always, and there was cross pollination between, like, Murray came to Toronto for a tour and we went to Chicago, and Belushi came up to Toronto all the time to visit Danny. So there was traffic back and forth. We knew who all the players were.
And everybody who works with Paul Schaefer usually winds up with a Paul Schaefer imitation. So let's hear yours.
You have a pretty good one too, Gil.
Well, let's see. I don't actually do Paul. I can't really do. No. I mean, if I heard him do something, I might imitate him. But, we have a little thing we do on the phone. When I call Paul, I just say 6. And it's a reference to something that Sinatra yelled out in one of his songs, meaning 6 bars to wrap it up. And based on another thing that some other guy in Toronto used to say, Paul will call me back, and if he misses me, it'll be ho. So it goes 6 ho. And that's our little link. I just missed his show. I saw in Vegas, he was playing in Caesars at Cleopatra's Bar, one of the lounge rooms there. And Marty went and Eugene went. I was supposed to go with them, but I got a new chair for my office. Okay. And I thought my old chair was hurting my back. So I get this amazing $1,000, $1,200 chair that's really good for your back. But what I didn't know is that the wheels make the chair roll more freely than my old chair. So I get up at this very desk thinking I got to do something. And then when I'd sit, I'd just kind of drop in the chair, but the chair had rolled away and it was gone. And I dropped back down onto my sacrum and just like, holy crap. I couldn't sit, stand, or do anything over the whole holidays. So I couldn't go see Paul's show, and I was really disappointed about that. Anyway.
Do a little Paul for Dave.
Yeah, let's hear.
Oh. Yeah, Gilbert, he's sucking Harry Shearer. Yeah, Harry Shearer, he hates you.
We love Paul.
Now, I think you said that when Second City went on the air, it was actually bombing.
No, it wasn't bombing. It just nobody was watching.
Yeah.
I guess that's another way to bomb. But,
yeah.
we were, the show was syndicated in the U.S. It wasn't on any network. And it was sold through this guy named Jack Rhodes, who was involved with a company. It might have even been his company called Filmways. And they were syndicators of things. And nobody knew what to do with this little bastard half hour of sketch comedy. And so we're in 48 markets in our first season of the U.S., in most of the major markets like Los Angeles and New York, but not in enough markets, and certainly no promotion or advertising. People had to discover the show to find that it was on, and it was on really late. So it's very hard to discover a show like that unless you're a night watchman,
Mm-hmm.
So
and that was Candy, Eugene, Catherine, you obviously, Flaherty, Andrea Martin, and Harold Ramis was the head writer.
Right, for the first year. Mm-hmm. And then Harold left, and I became head writer after he left. So,
and you started auditioning Misfits writers.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
There's a guy that I hired named Eddie Gordetsky who works with
sure.
Chuck Lorre a lot. You know Eddie?
Oh, sure.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. He's a
I
big
gave him his first job.
No kidding.
You know,
he's a big deal, Eddie.
Josh Weinstein and Bill Oakley.
Oakley and Weinstein, yeah.
I gave them their first job. I gave Dave Cohan and Max Muchnick.
Sure, the Will and Grace creators.
I gave them their first job. So that I got them in the WGA. I was this is one thing you didn't mention in your run of things that I did. I was the producer of the Dennis Miller show for a while.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
His Tribune show. So that's where I met those guys.
Was Overton on that show? Who was on that writing staff?
Oh, Overton wasn't.
Yeah, he came later.
I forget all the guys that were on it.
Yeah, I find it interesting too that you're not only a student of comedy, but you're a student of comedy writers. You were. I saw in your interview with Kevin Pollak that you were firing off the names of guys that used to write for Mad Magazine, and guys like Arnie Kogan and Larry Siegel, who used to cross over to TV and write Mad.
Dick DeBartolo.
And Dick DeBartolo. By the way, I sent Dick DeBartolo, who's a friend and who's done this show, I sent him your clip, and he was enormously flattered that you mentioned his name.
Really?
Yes.
Well, God bless him. I mean, those guys, when I was a kid, I was like, man, that's where it's at. Those guys got a nice turn. They know how to tell a joke.
Oh,
Al Jaffe. Remember snappy answers to stupid questions?
we had Jaffe here. We had him on the show.
Did?
Yeah, he's 96.
Oh, God. Holy shit. I remember one of his jokes is like a guy at the maitre d' at a restaurant standing there alone. He says, no, he's there. He's there with his wife. It's a couple standing at the maitre d', and the maitre d' says, "Table for how many?" He goes, "Table for one. My wife will be sitting on my shoulders."
Al is still going strong, Dave.
Yeah,
he's still doing it.
They're old Borscht Belt jokes, but God bless them.
Yeah. Tell us about how long were you doing the stage show before? Was it Bernie Solins who decided that we have to turn this into a television show?
Yeah.
So how long were you doing the stage show? And it's interesting, too. You talk about luck and timing and serendipity, how all this is happening for you. You audition for this thing because you just want to have fun, and that's what you want to be doing, and sooner before you know it, you're on TV.
Well, I went to college with Eugene and Marty.
Right.
So I knew those guys from school. And I didn't just, in all fairness, I didn't just hear that Second City was having auditions. Eugene called me, and he said, "You got to get in here and audition."
I see.
Marty and Eugene called me for Godspell too. They said, "You got to get in here and audition." And I said, "Oh, okay." So I drove in from Hamilton. I was teaching first year tutorials at the time while I was working on a master's degree because I didn't know what to do, and they went to Toronto to try the acting thing, and I was too chicken to do it at first. And they called. I drove to Toronto, got in Godspell. So Eugene called me and said, "You got to get in here and audition for Second City. There's an opening." And so I went and auditioned, and he did some lobbying for me, in all fairness, but I got in. You have to do 5 characters through the door, they call it. So you go through the door, do a character, do some jokes, blah, 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 and then clearly and cleanly establish your character, then exit and come on right away as another character and do 5 characters in a row. And then there's other stuff that they do, but that was one of the things.
And I don't do him, but can you do a Eugene Levy?
Does anybody do Eugene Levy?
He is a very thoughtful guy, and will take his time to nail something down. We used to tease him relentlessly, about his. He has a natural kind of Jack Benny speed. That's his speed. That's Eugene isn't doing a bit. That's him. He has a different clock than the rest of us, But God bless him on SCTV. He was like a robot.
Oh my God!
He'd go off by himself, and he would just bang, 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 bang. He would write a piece every day. He was like a robot.
I have to say, going back and watching those sketches, what occurs to you is how edgy, how savage you guys were, especially when it came to show business characters. How ruthless that satire was. People like Lola Heatherton and Sammy Maudlin. I mean, even today, it's got a lot of teeth.
Well, it's worse today. I mean, you got these snowflakes in the audience today. I don't think you can do anything today. I'm so glad I'm not trying to do comedy now. And I have to tell you, moving into drama is largely because my stuff is so dark and so different that I couldn't give it away.
Yeah.
So, I found transitioning to drama really easy. But, we never, like my impersonation of Bob Hope was something that was based on, admiration and respect, not for the guy who became, the guy that people in the 70s thought was a warmonger and things like that. He wasn't really. I got to know him. I spent time with him. I did shows with him. I got invited over to his house one day. I was shooting Grace Under Fire at CBS Radford, and that's very close to his house in Toluca Lake. And I'd done some stuff with him and met him and been at his house before. And his publicist, a guy named Ward Grant, called me and he said, "Bob wants you to come over to the house." I went, "Okay." So I just got in the car, left the rehearsal, and came over to Bob Hope's house. I mean, Bob Hope. So, so I get there. Now, he's still sharp, but he's slowing down a little, And Ward says he's upstairs outside the bedroom. He had a little kind of a makeup area that he set up outside his bedroom, and he would get made up there before going over to NBC. Then he wouldn't have to go to makeup at NBC. And so I walk up the stairs, and he's sitting there when I get up there, and he turns and he sees me. He goes, "Oh, hi, Dave. What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, Ward said you wanted me to come over." And he looks at me, he goes, "Oh, yeah? Well, what do you want?" Now, I know you don't get into it with an old guy like that, saying, no, Ward said you wanted me to come over. You told Ward you wanted me to come over, and now you're saying, what do you want? So I didn't get it. When he said, "What do you want?" I just looked at him. I said, "I want to see that picture you got of Patton pissing in the Rhine." I'd heard about this. Hope lights up like a Christmas tree. He said, "You heard about that? Come here, I'll show you." And he walks me to this hall of pictures outside the bedroom. And he's describing as he walks. He said, "Patton said he'd cut a swath through Hitler's Europe and he'd piss in his Rhine." And he said, "I got a picture of him doing it." And he said, "The family, they wanted, there were 3 of these pictures and the family wanted them all back. And they got the other 2, but I'd never give them this one."
Oh, Lord.
And there's this picture of General Patton, twin Colts on his hip, the Colt pistols on his hips, and dick out, pissing in the Rhine. And I thought that was just amazing. And then he goes to the picture right beside him. He said, "Yeah, this is Neil Armstrong. He did my special right after he got back from the moon." Who can say that,
That impression is uncanny.
I got into him when I was doing SCTV, and then that became my ticket. Everybody loved that impression, from Robert Klein and Albert Brooks to Johnny Carson, and I ended up doing the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. Everybody wanted me to do Bob Hope. But unlike Joe Piscopo, I never thought I was almost Hope. I just did my stupid impersonation. I was on his 90th birthday special.
I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, and that's where I did Chester Hope,
right?
His nephew. And the producer of the show said, "When you finish your bit, Dave, I want you to walk down this ramp. Bob and Dolores are going to be sitting here." And he said, "He won't recognize you. He won't be able to hear you. He won't know who you are." And I said, "Well, then why do you want me to walk down the ramp?" And they said, "Because everybody's doing it." Right. So I walked down the ramp, And Hope gets up. He gets up and walks over to me. And so I see the camera's repo. You're always watching that stuff out of the corner of your eyes, right? Like, where's my camera? And Hope walks up to me. He says, "Hey, Dave," he says, "it's been some time since I saw you up there in Toronto there." And I'm like, holy crap. He knows me? And I said, "Yeah, Bob, how you doing?" I said, "A happy birthday. It's a pleasure to be on your show." And then as we're talking, I notice he's blocking my camera. And I just think, he's old. He made a mistake. So I just counter a little bit so that I can see the camera covering me, because there's a 2-shot and then there's a cross to me and a cross to him. So I countered a little bit, and then he counters with me, blocking me again. And I countered a third time, and he was blocking my shot on purpose. And so I looked at him. I needed a way out of this. And I said, "Hey, Bobby, I can do something with my ski jump nose that you can't do." And he said, "Oh, yeah, what's that?" And I had, as part of my Bob Hope impersonation, this makeup SCTV woman, Bev Scheckman, who did makeup on SCTV. She made me a little kind of a ski jump thing for the end of my nose, a prosthetic piece that I'd glue on my nose. So I'm standing there with Bob, and I said, "I can do something with my ski jump nose you can't do." And I just pulled that piece right off and handed it to him, and he laughed. I got him, and it made me feel so good,
That's
and
great.
that was my out.
That's great.
You know what I always found strange with Hope? It's like
What?
there were two of him. There was the early Bob Hope, where he's kind of effeminate and eye-rolling and loads of nervous energy. And then in the later Hope and Crosby movies, he already started doing that one. He became the later Bob Hope.
I think, if by that you mean like Road to Hong Kong, which he did in 1960, which was much later, you're absolutely right. What happens with a lot of comedians, and I think this happened with Bob, he had this amazing energy, and when he did his monologues in the 40s during the war and things like that, they used to call him Rapid Robert. And the reason they called him that was because his monologues were so fast. And if you listen to those old radio shows, not only is he fast, he'll be doing his jokes like that real fast, like that. And there's the audience is fast with him. The whole thing is speeded up really fast. And I thought it was like, well, this is a weird recording. This is an issue of the recording. And then I heard other things and realized it wasn't. So then, there's that thing that comedians do where one day they have had some success, and then girls are paying attention to them because women like guys on television more than they like guys who aren't on television. Then they walk by the mirror and they go, "Hey, I don't look too bad." That's the beginning of the end. That's when a comedian thinks that they can play a leading man. I saw Belushi make that mistake when he did Continental Divide.
Oh yeah, with Blair Brown.
And it was just like, come on, you're the short Albanian guy who is known for shoving potatoes in your face. So I do think that affected Bob. And then Bob started hobnobbing with all the presidents. And I used to do this joke. This is just for, Brian Dolan Murray and Paul Schaefer and people like that. But Bob would actually drop his voice about an octave when he was talking about either generals or presidents. And, he would be, "Yeah, we're going to have my special, and I'm going to have Kiki D is going to be on it. And also, President Ford's going to drop by for a little while." And so his voice would drop.
Kiki D!
His voice would drop very reverentially for, politicians. And I was down there at Da Nang, and Joey Heatherton did her number, and then General Westmoreland dropped by. And it was marvelous to see him there, So that was, I think, the beginning of the end for Bob, when he became a guy who golfed with the politicians, and you lose touch with your audience, and you become part of the joke instead of being the guy who's standing outside it doing the jokes, But God bless him, he had this longevity and this amazing energy that just pushed him right through to the 90s. I don't think anybody's going to have a career like that these days. Things are much faster and more disposable.
And I think a lot of performers too, they reach the self-proclaimed grand old man of show business status.
Yeah. And it's a shame.
Well, those later specials, I mean, if you're a fan of his, they're a little difficult to watch because obviously he's more than lost his fastball. But
and he does another thing on those later specials. He got into this thing where he'd do his joke and then he'd turn like this. He'd do this real serious.
Oh, yes.
And he'd go, yeah, and hey, this is Bobby. Get that bunker bomb out of my cave, Hope. Oh, coming to you live from Tora Bora, Afghanistan's hideaway spot where Mujahideen families can get a luxury cave for less than $5 a day.
I wish we were on video so people could see that tape.
Yeah, it was that classic Hope look that you did of where he's looking underneath his eyelids at the audience.
Yeah. And it's like, oh, I just did something naughty and you're going to love it, And it's like, no, you didn't, Bob.
Did you ever share what Play It Again, Bob, with him?
Oh, God, yeah, I did that. Jeff Barron, who was a writer on SCTV and also one of Hope's writers, took me backstage while we were doing SCTV, and I had set up a monitor. He was playing in Toronto at O'Keefe Center, and I had a monitor, and I brought a video cassette with me, and we set this stuff up. That was the second time I'd actually met Hope, and but the first time he actually knew who I was. So I played Play It Again, Bob, for him. We did this other bit. Hope did this thing in the 80s where he went to China and he did a monologue in China and he had a Chinese interpreter. Now, all of Hope's jokes are like references to American culture. And they're things that these people who are behind the Iron Curtain of China, they're not going to get that. They're not going to get any of the stuff because it's such a cultural difference. So the interpreter is saying something completely different, probably making fun of him. And so one of the sketches we did on SCTV was Bob and Mel Shavelson, played by Rick Moranis, who was one of his writers, sitting backstage with some Chinese writers, trying to come up with some topical stuff that Chinese people relate. And I played that for Hope, and Hope laughed. He didn't get into the joke of what we were doing as much as he got into, that really happened. He said, we did a show in China there, and it was so hard to come up with the references that those people would like,
Hilarious.
And anyway,
I remember the Bob Hope Desert Classic too, with Begin and Arafat. That was another SCTV sketch.
That was the first time I did the impersonation, and Brian Doyle Murray wrote that with me. It's
great.
He was one of the authors of Caddyshack, because collectively we figured that Bob's two things were golf and war. So if we put it together, so we did a desert classic in the Middle East with Menachem Begin and Yasser Arafat as golfers, and Bob bringing them together. Yasser Arafat, isn't he something, ladies and gentlemen?
It's on YouTube. I urge our listeners to find it because it's wonderful. But you met him when you were 16 the first time?
Yeah. He played in Toronto, and I ran backstage as he was getting into his limo. He's already in the limo. I put my hand in the limo to shake hands with him, and he almost closed my hand in the limo. And then I met him again. Catherine O'Hara, Marty Short, and Andrea Martin and I did this really horrible gig at the Playboy Gorge Club in New Jersey. And we had no idea what we'd signed on for. It was one of those things that your agent goes, yeah, it's terrific. You're going to love it. It's a great gig and the money's good. So anyway, we go there. And what we found out when we got there was they were closing the club and they were doing a show. They were going to come out and say to the staff, ladies and gentlemen, don't bother coming in tomorrow because you're all fired. and now a show. And then Catherine O'Hara, Marty Short, and Henry Martin and I had to come out and try to make these people laugh who just found out they have no job. And Hope was the main event on that night. And so we were walking in the lobby towards the backstage area, and then Hope came in with his entourage. And I said, hey, Bobby, I met you in Toronto. And he stops and he says, oh, yeah? He said, where? I said, at the Canadian National Exhibition. He said, oh, yeah, I remember that. And I said, yeah, I shook hands with you. You almost closed my hand in your power window. And he looks at me. He said, oh, I know what it was. He was still walking and I was walking with him while we were talking about this. And I said, I met you in Toronto. Yeah. And you almost closed my hand in your power window. And he said, yeah, I must have been in a big hurry. And I said, like you are now, Bob? And he stopped. And he said, no, I'm not in that big a hurry. Who are you? What's your name? So I talked to him a little bit there. So I met him at the Gorge Club. And then the third time was backstage with Jeff Barron when I showed him these sketches. And one of the things he said, Rich Little, he's tried to do me. And he said he could do all these other votes. He can't do me at all. He said, but you got it down. That's wild. That's
I watched Play It Again, Bob, last night, and it just, the random Anita Ekberg reference. It's just wonderful. It's on YouTube for people who haven't seen it. Shame on you. Watch it. And Flaherty shows up as Bing, of course.
So we got a leading lady in this thing for me?
Well, it's not really a leading lady per se. It's
what, do you got a troupe of gals?
Well, actually, there's an affair that you get involved in.
Oh, that's good, yeah.
And then from there, like, there's sort of
Can we get Joey Heatherton for that?
Well, actually, for that, I was looking at a terrific actress. I don't know if you know her, Diane Keaton. She's really, really, really great.
That string bean that was in your movie?
What do you mean? She's terrific. She's versatile. She's attractive. She's great.
Geez, I don't know. I need a girl with a build. If I'm going to fall in love with her, it's got to be realistic for me.
Realistic? I mean, it's exactly what I'm going for, I mean, I don't want to mug or go too broad with this thing.
Yeah, well, what's wrong with Anita Ekberg? At least she's,
Well, what's with the hands? You want an actress with arthritis?
Yeah. Okay, look, Woody, you hang loose, okay? I'm going to be right back. Look, your mood ring's turning black. Take it easy, boy. Take it easy.
Mood ring? What is this, 1968?
And now, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Bob Hope.
The Village People, ladies and gentlemen, aren't they something? They're the first rock group to stay at the Waldorf Astoria and request bunk beds. Now, seriously, ladies and gentlemen, I think that our next act is going to be something that you're going to love.
I was interested in the structure of his jokes, too. They were like, if he was doing ISIS jokes today, it would be something like, hey, how about that ISIS? Aren't they something? Fighting the jihad to the last man. Jihad, that's Arabic for I'll believe anything that some crackpot in a beard tells me. It's like those definitions is very much a Bob Hope thing, or, yes, sir, what a country. Mountains, caves, desert, poverty, mutilated women, and 24-hour-a-day prayer. Who needs paradise when you can get it all here in Afghanistan? You know what I mean? So there's these structured things that were real. And after a while, I could write them. It was like, oh, yeah, okay, I know how to write that. And Jeff Barron came in, and I learned from him how to write Hope jokes. So I'm doing a special with him. This was before the 90th birthday. It was Bob Hope Salutes the Young Comedians. And it was Crystal Bernard and I were the hosts of a Bob Hope special. Bob wasn't even the host of his own special. And, and I wrote the monologue for it. And Bob's reading the script. His daughter, Linda, told me this. He's reading the script and he says, hey, when we do this earthquake joke, do the bit, I danced around the house and then the house danced around me. Do that. And Linda said, well, that's not your monologue, Dad. That's Dave Thomas's monologue where he's doing you. And Hope looks at her and he goes, yeah? Well, tell him to put it in anyway, because if he's going to do me, he should do me the way I would do me. So I had Hope punching up my monologue,
I love it.
It was amazing. Yeah.
Tell us, Gilbert wants to hear your Von Sydow. Tell us about getting Max Von Sydow for Strange Brew, because it's such a fun story.
Well, I was a huge fan of Max von Sydow, primarily from 3 Days of the Condor. I had seen all the stuff, the Bergman stuff that he had done, and then he was the first Jesus to ever show his face.
Sure.
So, when we were sitting in Freddie Fields' office at MGM, and we were going to do the movie, Freddie Fields was the president of MGM, former manager of Judy Garland and Mickey Rooney, probably one of the most evil men in Hollywood. But anyway, he says, "Who do you want for Brewmeister Smith?" And I said, "Max von Sydow." So he goes, "Hey, Adele, get Max von Sydow on the phone." So they call him in Sweden, and and he goes, "Max, yeah, hi, Freddie." And he had done a movie with him, and so Max knew Freddie. And he said, "I got these two guys here, Dave Thomas and Rick Moranis. They got this very funny movie. I forget. I'll let them tell you about it. Here." And he hands me the phone. So I had to tell Max do a short summary of the plot of Strange Brew. And I stumbled through it the best way I could. And I didn't hear anything on the other end of the line. And then I finished. And then he goes, "So it's a comedy then." And so he said, send me the script. I'll read it. So I found out later that he called his son, and his son lived in the States. And he said, "I'm getting an offer to do a movie for MGM with Bob and Doc McKenzie. Have you heard of them?" And his son said, "Oh God, yeah, you got to do that, Dad. They're great. And so he did it. And I met him in Toronto. We were shooting that night, and he showed up when we were shooting the riot at the theater at the very beginning of the movie, where Bob and Doug try to wreck their own movie. And I walked out. I was introduced by the producer, and I said, "Max, I'm so thrilled you're doing this. I know everything you've ever done. Bergman, all the Bergman stuff. First Jesus to ever show his face, and greatest story ever told." And I said, "And 3 Days of the Condor," I said, "God, I memorized your last speech." Von Sydow, he's 6'6", he's a big man, and I'm a little guy. And he looks down at me and he says, "So, can you do it for me now?" So I have to do this speech for 3 Days of the Condor, and I get partway through it, and he cuts me off, and he said, that was my idea." And I said, "What was your idea?" He said, "The script was, but he will leave the door open, and because I'm playing European, I said, no, he will leave open the door." And I was kind of like, that's your brilliant ad?
He's fun in Strange Brew, Dave. He's fun. He's an inspired casting choice.
He's so good, and so professional, and set such a high bar for, especially Rick and I, who'd never done a movie, let alone directed a movie.
Yeah.
What a mad thing that they gave us the job of directing that. It was insane. There was a director attached, and MGM fired him.
What was this?
How did the McKenzie brothers come to be?
It's a well-told story, but it's the CBC. The CBC version of the show was 2 minutes longer, meaning that it had 2 minutes less commercial content than the American syndicated version. So this was in the third season. So CBC said, do something distinctly Canadian with that 2 minute difference. And we were kind of insulted by that. It's like, what are you talking about? We're all Canadians doing this show. This isn't an issue of nationalism. And so Rick and I collectively said, what do you want us to do? Wear toques and parkas and sit in front of a map of Canada and drink beer? And they said, yeah, that's fine. If you could have a Mountie on the show, that would be good too. And if you look at the early Bob and Doug's, we had a Mountie mug, a mug that was in the shape of a Mountie. And it was a mean-spirited joke aimed to make fun of the CBC, and ended up becoming a gold mine for Rick and myself. And it's just, you never know what an audience is going to pick that they're going to like. You don't ever know what's going to be what they call going viral today. We had no clue that, people were going to like it. We were just doing it for ourselves, to amuse ourselves. And people got into it. And
then some.
Yeah.
It spawned an album and feature.
Then, the album made so much money for us that I bought a house with an indoor pool in Toronto. It's just like, what the hell, And I was never good with my, Wright. What's his name? The comedian, Wright.
Stephen Wright.
Stephen Wright joke. I love his joke, which is, how did the fool and his money get together in the first place? I think that perfectly describes me, So I was driving a Mercedes at a house with an indoor pool, and it was all Bob and Doug money. It was just crazy.
Yeah. Theme song in the movie by your brother Ian.
Yeah.
Yep. Painted Ladies, I remember.
Yeah.
So here we go. Here's a couple of wild cards that are on our cards. You can tell us about the great Tom Poston, which you said was the best experience, the best part of the experience of Grace Under Fire was befriending and working with Tom. Or you can tell us a Buck Henry story because you work with Buck on the ill-fated New Show.
And of course, everybody who's we've had on the show, who's worked with Pat McCormick, I have to ask if they can tell their version, if they know it, of the helicopter story.
I don't know the helicopter story.
Oh.
Wow.
Well, we'll another time we'll tell you the helicopter story.
Okay. All right. Really quickly, Buck Henry. So we're doing the New Show. I'm having dinner with Lorne and Candace Bergen and Buck. And, this is another one of Dave Thomas's free rides in the business where I don't know how I got there, but there I am. And Lorne tells stories and is known for his storytelling. And I love Lorne. He was very nice to me in New York, but he's not the most self-aware person. And so he's telling these stories, and we're sitting at dinner, and he's saying, it was 1968, and I was doing laughing, and Buck goes, that fucking does it. And he throws his knife and fork down, stomps out of the restaurant. Candace Bergen is like, what the hell? And I'm what the hell? And Lorne is like unflappable. You can literally self-combust in front of Lorne, he won't react. So Lorne says, gee, I wonder what's bothering Buck. And I said, well, Lorne, I don't know. I've only known you about 6 months, and I've heard that 1968 Peter Sellers story, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 times. Buck has known you for a long time. He must have heard it maybe 100 times. Maybe that was it, 100 times. And Lorne looks at me and goes, no, I don't think that's it. I think something else is troubling him. So I get back to the offices. We had offices in the Brill building, and Buck's there in his office. And I said, what the fuck happened? I said, what the heck happened? And Buck says, if I have to hear that goddamn story one more time, that was exactly why he stormed out, The New Show was a very funny experience because Lorne wasn't totally committed to the show. It was something he was doing between his 2 stints on SNL. Remember, he did it and then he left the show. Dick Ebersol was producing it for a while, and there's somebody else I forget. Female producer. Anyway, so he wanted to I think he'd already had in his mind that he made a mistake by giving up SNL and he wanted to go back. So he didn't really put a lot of effort into the New Show. And I remember storming into his office one time, really mad, because he said he was going to, Dave, I'm bringing you to New York. You never became a star on SCTV. You're going to be a star now. So I stormed into his office. We were 68th in the ratings of 70 shows.
Wow.
It was just awful. And I throw the ratings on his desk and I say, hey, not bad for the legendary producer of SNL. I cannot believe that you are doing nothing to make this show work. You promised me you're going to make me a big star. I'm not even going to be able to get a job after this show. And he looks at me and he goes, it's true. These days, instead of thinking about what great comedy idea I want to do, I think about what I want to eat that day when I get up. I burst out laughing. This is the stupidest response, but it's so typical of Lauren because nobody knows how to defuse rage from performers better than Lauren.
That's a talent.
And he just, pricked the balloon on Dave Thomas and let all the air come out. And it was, it was just.
It's a shame because you look at them now, and I was watching a bunch of them, and the talent that's on that show. I mean, not only yourself and Buck, but Valerie Bromfield and John Candy did a bunch, and you got Randy Newman in there, Steve Martin's on there, Penny Marshall. It's incredible.
And the writing room was amazing.
I
with
bet.
George Myers and Gamble and Pross.
Oh, they're great.
Franken and Davis and
Was Zweibel there still?
Zweibel.
Yeah.
Buck Henry.
Yeah. That's an amazing room.
I love that writer's room.
It should have succeeded with all of that talent.
Sure. Yeah, it should have.
So what about Pat McCormick? Anything?
I was doing a Bob Hope roast at the Beverly Hilton, and I had to, I'm not a stand-up, so I needed jokes. So I'm doing Bob Smith, who was one of the Tonight Show writers, was also a Grace Under Fire writer. So he came over to my dressing room. He was helping me with jokes. Tom Poston was also on the roast with me, and he was helping. And then Tom said, I'll call Pat McCormick. He'll come over. So Pat came over to Grace Under and sat in my dressing room. And he gave me one joke, which I thought, it's too cheap. I can't do that joke. And the joke was, on the theme of Bob being so old, he says, the joke is, I complimented Bob on his new alligator shoes. And he says, I'm not wearing any shoes. So I thought, well, that's too cheap. I can't do that joke. So cut to the evening, and on the dais with me, Phyllis Diller, Norm Crosby, Sid Caesar, Connie Stevens. Phyllis Diller does that alligator shoe joke and kills with it.
Oh.
So I didn't know what I was doing, and I had this joke that I wanted to do at the beginning, which was a long get, and Poston warned me not to do it, but I did it anyway and totally tanked. But I don't mind tanking, if to me, it's all an experiment. I've already done way more, had way more fun, and had way more opportunities than I honestly believe I deserve. So if I go out there, it's like, try this, see what the hell is. I never really looked at any of it as real.
Yeah.
The money was fake. You'd get this money, well, how much do you want for doing that? I want this much, and I'll walk if I don't get it. Well, it was just like ridiculous amounts of money that you didn't need and that you didn't deserve, and that they gave it to you, and this business just amazes me.
I read an interview with you. You said one of the great things about show business is that you can be the guy looking in the window, and if you want it badly enough, that it can actually happen.
I really believe that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I know Oprah's made kind of a religion out of it, and now people want her to be president. But I mean, God, I do believe that I sat in Canada watching Bob Hope on TV when I was a kid, and to say to any of my friends, I'm going to work with that guy, they would have thought
of
that
course.
I was committed. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I was in Dundas, Ontario, Canada. Hollywood and Bob Hope might as well have been on Mars for its accessibility to Dave Thomas.
And you were saying that people come up to you and they say, how can I make it in show business?
And that means they're never going to make it. Because if they ask that question, they're already disadvantaged. The people that make it are the people who, the question you ask them is there anything that could have stopped you? that, they were so relentless. And, I told you, when I got that advertising job, I was relentless. I made up fake ads. I went through the Yellow Pages. I phoned every ad agency. I had doors slammed in my face. I knew it was going to be bad. And the whole job in this business, and it's worse today. I mean, I have a son that's in the business, and it's harder for actors today than it ever was. I got in at a lucky time. I got in when they were paying, before the internet lowered the bar and lowered the money.
Boy, that sure happened.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, absolutely.
Well, there's so much free content, and this generation is not used to paying for it.
Yeah, the whole age of Seinfeld, Friends, and Everybody Loves Raymond money is gone.
Totally. And that's part of why I moved over to drama.
Right. And we'll reiterate again that you're writing shows like The Blacklist now.
Yeah. So there's still some of that money around if you come up with a drama, or even if you're on staff for a drama.
Or if you Chuck Lorre.
Yeah. You can still make pretty good money, but that old model is dying fast. And the studios just look at it and they go, wait a minute. These internet companies are getting this content for what? Nothing, or like 10 cents on the dollar? That lower the bar, lower everything, So, yeah, the money isn't going to get better. It's going to get worse, I think.
You want to tell us a little bit about Poston?
See, I became. Here's how we got on the show. Another
guy you were probably watching when you were very young.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, Steve Allen.
Yeah. I was a huge fan, and Brett Butler was famous. She was the star of Grace Under Fire. I was originally hired as her co-star, but I became the platonic friend when I wouldn't kiss her. Anyway, in the second or third season, they hired this really terrible actor to play my father, and Brett was famous for her tantrums, and I had never had one because I didn't care. And I had a tantrum when I saw this guy. I said, "Forget it. I'm not doing this. This guy's my dad." And they said, "Well, who do you want to be your dad?" And I said, "Well, get somebody good like Tom Poston." And I meant Tom Poston as an example.
Right.
And next day, I come in. Tom's there.
Wow.
And he walks up to me. He goes, "I understand I have you to thank for this job." So we just had so much fun together, and it really became like a father and son relationship, and I would do stuff on the show just to make Tom laugh. That was my goal, was to break him up, and
he had a sick sense of humor, didn't he?
Yeah.
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 That's what we've heard. J.J. Wall told us that too.
Oh, yeah.
Work with Tom.
And he's fearless. Like he does totally off-color, racist, sexist.
Yeah, I know someone like that.
So there was a guy that Brett kept going through her male co-stars, so come to fifth season, there's this guy DC something, a black guy, and he had one of these kind of voices like that. Tom is standing backstage as this guy does his first scene. And the guy walks off, and Tom's got his arms folded. He's looking at him very critically. The guy looks at me. He's a big guy. And he goes, "What? What are you, a problem? What are you looking at?" Tom just looks at him, and Tom says, "That is the worst impersonation of a black person that I ever heard."
Unbelievable.
So, I mean, come on. So...
What a funny guy.
Yeah. When his wife died, and Suzanne Plachette's husband died, and they had a fling together in the 50s, and then they started dating. And she said, my wife and I went out for dinner with them, and when they got engaged, and Suzanne told the story, and Suzanne's kind of coarse but funny, coarse funny. And she says, "Yeah, Tom gave me a ring." And she said, "I told him I wouldn't sleep with him unless he gave me a rock." And I mean, a big effing rock. And so she said, Tom says, so, and Tom picks up the story here. He says, so I went to a jeweler. He said, and I had a piece of gravel mounted on a very expensive set. He said, I had it put in a nice little box. And he said, I took her out. I got down on one knee and I gave her the ring. He said, she opened it and just laughed her ass off and said, yes, I do. So they got married. And then I was at their reception, which was at the Beverly Hilton. Merv donated the Beverly Hilton. This was one of the best nights of my life. It was just like everybody from 70s TV was there. You know, I was at a table with Merv and Bob Einstein and Don Rickles and just everybody from that era, you know. And there was a band that what was the guy's name? The trumpet player on the old Merv Griffin show.
Oh, was it Jack Sheldon?
Yeah, Jack put together a band, and people could go up and sing. Anybody who wanted to sing could go up there, and there's a full orchestra, and they knew everything. It was a fantastic evening.
I think he was in Yarmy's Army. I think Tom Post, and he hung around with those guys. Yeah, Don Knotts and McCormick and Jack Riley
and Don Adams.
All those great characters.
So he was in my office one day, and he said, Don Knotts has the stupidest message on his answering machine. He said, we got to call it and hear it. And he said, the message is, you have reached, and his voice really high. So we called Don Adams, and he says, he gives me the phone. He says, you got to hear this. So I put the phone up to my ear, and Don picks up. Wait, am I saying the right guy? The guy from Mayberry?
Yeah, Don Knotts.
Don Knotts.
Yeah.
I said Don Adams.
Yeah, Don Knotts.
I meant Don Knotts. And Don says, hello? And I went, oh, shit. It's him. We didn't get the answering machine. And I said, hi, Don. It's Dave Thomas. I'm here with your buddy Tom Poston. And why don't you just hand the phone to him and he can explain? And I hand the phone to Tom, embarrassed, you know, that Don had picked up, and we were just going to be laughing at his message. And Don says to Tom, what do you want? And Poston says, I wanted Dave to hear that stupid message. Where your voice goes up real high and you sound like an idiot. And anyway, so yeah, that was.
What was Brett Butler like to work with?
That was one of I was going to ask that question because it came in from one of our listeners. But
did it really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
so everyone wants to know.
Bjartmar Janssen is his name.
People would say to me, so what's the story with her? Is it drugs? Is it alcohol? And I said, no, you don't get to where she is just by abusing drugs or alcohol. I've worked with plenty of people who have those problems. You have to be insane first, and then add drugs and alcohol to get the kind of punch that she hard.
Well, since we're talking about our listeners here, we got one for you. There's a bunch of them here, Dave, but time permitting. Eric Connor says, "How the hell did you get Mel Blanc to play your dad in Strange Brew?"
Well, believe it or not, it was about money, and Mel was $10,000 an hour for voiceover work.
Wow!
And so back then, and so I said I want him to do the father, and they estimated it'd be like a 3-hour session, $30,000. So Freddie Field says, no way I'm paying that guy $10,000 an hour. So I thought, oh God, how am I going to do this? So I said, okay. I said to the producer, tell him we have a 3-hour session, and we talked him into doing the 3 hours for $10,000. We got a deal on Mel's price. Then Freddie Field says, yeah, okay. He says, okay to that. Well, we gave him. I knew we could get him in and out in under an hour, so he got his $10,000 an hour that way.
And you got to work with another hero, another childhood hero.
And when I met him, I got a great picture of the two of us together. But when I met him, he had this thick pipe, this throat that seemed thicker and more dense and had more larynx chords than most people. Do you know what I mean? He was genetically made to do those voices, like Yosemite Sam and Daffy Duck and Bugs. I don't know.
He's a unique talent.
Yeah.
Really, really.
Yeah, really unique.
And speaking of doing impressions and voices, I love your Richard Harris story. And I found the SCTV skit, which is what is it? Mel's. I'm trying to remember the bit. Mel's Rock Palace.
Oh, Mel's Rock Pile.
Mel's Rock Pile. Excuse me.
Well, it's based on Richard Harris singing MacArthur Park.
Which, by the way, Gilbert. We had Jimmy Webb here, and Gilbert sang MacArthur Park with Jimmy accompanying him.
He did. You
on
did.
keyboards.
Yeah, it was one of the big thrills of my life.
I'll send you the clip.
So you know the high note.
Yes.
Someone left it, and it's an order don't live to bake it, and I'll never have that memory again. Oh no! There's a high note there, and so everyone knew Richard Harris didn't do that high note. So I go on Mel's Rock Pile as Richard Harris, and my impersonation of him was based on two things, really, and that was Richard Harris had a low voice down here like this, and a very high voice up here like this, and no voice in between. So he had the high shouting voice and the low voice. So I do the MacArthur Park thing, and we had a girl sitting in a chair and reading a novel right beside me during the whole thing. It's
so great.
What the hell's she doing there? And then when it gets to the high note, I just step aside. She leans into the mic and does the high note, and then I lean back in and take credit for it as though it was mine. Cut to, I don't know, 25 years later, I'm at some film thing, and somebody pulls me up to meet Richard Harris and says, Dave, you got to meet Richard Harris. Richard, this is Dave Thomas. He impersonated you on SCTV. He hated me. And he physically pushed me. He was just like, I never saw that bit you did of me, but I heard about it, and he's pushing me while he's doing that. Like, what I've never seen anyone communicate like that, where they punctuate every sentence with pushing somebody hard, So he claimed that he hadn't seen it, but I could tell that he had,
Gilbert, did you ever have a bad reaction from somebody where you were doing the impression and
I
they didn't appreciate Seinfeld?
So.
Seinfeld didn't appreciate your impression.
I used to imitate Seinfeld back when no one knew who he was, because we used to work at the same clubs, like Catch a Rising Star and Comic Strip, and he was just another comic. And I would start imitating him on stage. And all of the waitresses and waitstaff would run in and the other comics and laugh at that. The audience had no idea.
Do a little bit for Dave so he gets it.
And I heard when I would do that, Seinfeld wouldn't come in for that. And he'd pace the bar angrily going, "That doesn't sound anything like me."
Is that the worst of it, though? Of anybody that you've ever done an impression of?
I think so.
Nobody ever gave you a hard time?
And, I just remembered a Bob Hope story I heard that was...
Oh, yeah.
That I heard it was when they were cutting for a commercial. Carson said to Hope, he said, I was reading about you, and I heard you were born in London. You were raised in like a rat-infested apartment, and your parents, your father was an alcoholic. Both of them died when you were young. Your older brother died, and you were left to fend for yourself on the streets. And Hope just goes, "Yeah, that's wild, isn't it?"
Because he didn't hear.
Yeah.
He didn't hear it.
You probably didn't hear it.
Well, he had a real hearing handicap, right?
Oh,
Bob did.
No,
You didn't know
no.
that? Oh God!
We only assumed it was later in life that he went.
No. Well, no, he started going deaf in his like bad deaf in his 80s.
Uh-huh.
And where he really couldn't hear you. and he wouldn't wear hearing aids. And that benefit that I told you, that roast, was hosted by the House Ear Clinic, which is this famous doctor, Dr. House in L.A. that does amazing things with people who have hearing handicaps. So, but Bob was very, very handicapped in terms of hearing, and he could hear. He said to me, he said, I can't hear other people, but I can hear you. And I said to him, that's because my voice is up in the same pitch and range as yours. You just love yourself so much that you can only hear people who sound like you. He looks at us, yeah, maybe that's right.
It's uncanny. It is uncanny. Next time we talk to you, Dave, we'll do this again down the road. And I was watching My Favorite Brunette, and Peter Lorre's in there, and I thought it'd be fun to have you doing Peter Lorre.
Oh yeah,
and Dave doing Bob Hope, and actually
that'd be great.
And actually read a scene.
Yeah,
and we'll do it next time. Last question I have on here, and we could go on forever because this is so damn entertaining. Do you have a tape of a conversation between Marty Short and Jerry Lewis that you trot out and listen to?
I did, and I misplaced it. I don't know where it is.
Oh, damn.
I think Marty still has a copy of that, but I'm not sure. Marty gave it to me. This is one of the sore spots between Marty and me, because I think I lost that thing, and I don't know where it is. But yeah, I had that tape, and it was a video of Marty and Jerry was just the biggest dick that you've such a jerk. My take on Jerry was that when he discovered the character Buddy Love in The Nutty Professor, then he never wanted to be anybody else, and it was the man that women loved and men feared, and that was the character that he played on his telethons. And he'd have the tux and the cigarette and Mr. Cool, and he was like Jerry the Swinger. And I found out, actually, I don't know if you know this, he got paid $1 million per telethon at a point in his career when he wasn't working anywhere.
Did you know that, Gil?
No.
Wow, that's news.
Yeah, that was his gig, and he was getting $1 million per telethon. So he's like, for Jerry's kids, and we raised $220 million, and $1 million for Jerry.
Wow.
They'd fly him in on a private jet, and he would do the telethon, get $1 million, and go home. So
wow.
When he got bounced off that, I guess that's part of it, right? I will tell you one final hope story where I was sitting with him. I was doing one of his shows, and he got mad at me. And I always wanted to know why Hope never played Vegas. He was a guy that would do a Boy Scout breakfast if he could get $25,000 for it. Why did he never do the big money and play, the Sands or the Sahara or any of those clubs? And so I said to him, we were sitting there, I said, hey, Bob, how come you never played Vegas? In a typical style, like the story I told you before. He looks at me, he goes, well, why do you want to know? And I said, well, and now I'm on the spot. And I said, well, I'd heard that you'd never done it. And I'd heard that maybe that it might have something to do with, Dolores being so religious and Vegas being Sin City. And he gets really mad and he said, she has no say in what I do. And I'm, whoa, now I got Hope mad, and I got to backpedal fast. And I said, well, sorry, I said that's just what I heard. Somebody's theory. It's not even mine. He said, I'll tell you exactly why. He said, around about 1960, I had this idea for a show that I would do in Vegas. And the idea was that I would be the highest paid entertainer to ever play there. That was his idea for a show. And he said, well, and my people talked to their people. They wouldn't come up with the money. I just said, screw it. I never went there.
Our listeners are going to be upset, Gil, if we don't mention the Jack Frost, which I sent to Dave. Did you watch that clip, Dave, of Bob as Jack Frost in the last Christmas special?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes,
Gilbert has a theory about that.
Go ahead, let's hear it.
Truly believe, because when you watch that, it looks like he died 10 years ago. I mean, he is in horrible shape. And he's there with like a glue-on beard and a pointy elf hat.
And the icicles.
And yeah, icicles and fake snow around. And I think it was like Dolores's revenge for all the times he fucked around on her.
Well, I got to tell you, there's some truth to that because, when he said she has no say in what I do, that was definitely him, reacting to being led around by Dolores and Linda because, they had no real connection with him when he was in his prime. He was flying all over the world and with different babes and dolls and had different people on his arm at different times. And, he was a real, he was a real hound. No question about it.
I heard stories that he'd go to like Vietnam and stuff, for those shows. And he'd bring along always a sexy girl with him. And it was like he would hint to them or out and out tell them that if they didn't fuck him, he would leave them there.
All right. I became friendly with a lot of his writers. And
it's going to be a
I've
4-hour
had
show.
meals with them. And yes, that's partly true from what I heard from writers. Yeah.
Wow. A Gilbert Gottfried rumor
Wow,
is
that's
actually true. That's a first on
And
this show.
It wasn't just one girl either. It would be more than one girl. And, it's like, that side to him, I don't relate to that side. And, if he was a younger guy today, he would definitely have been on the Harvey Weinstein expose list.
Wow.
So he would threaten to leave them in like Vietnam and stuff.
Well, I heard that story.
Yeah.
So from one of his writers. So I would assume it's more than likely true.
It's the first time in 180 plus shows, Gilbert, that one of your stories had validity.
And here's something I always ask about every old performer. Do you know anything about Bob and Bing hating the Jews?
Really? No. I'll tell you why. All his writers were Jews.
Oh.
And he loved his writers. I think that anti-Semitism was, open and rampant back then. And he may have said things as a joke, but, guys like, Mel Shavelson and people like that Larry Gelbart and people like that work with he loved those guys. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
These guys were he knew that he was nothing without those guys. And here's one story that I heard, which was one of his the wives of one of the writers called looking for. No, Bob was calling.
Yes, I know this one.
Right. You know the story?
Yeah.
Yeah, the writer
covered
was in bed with his wife at the time, and Bob calls them like past midnight, and the writer said to his wife, "If Bob's there, I'm not home." And she goes, "Oh, sorry, Bob. Mel's not here right now."
No, he said he was with you. He said he was working for you. That's what she said.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so, and the writers go, no. And then Bob goes, "Oh yeah, wait a minute. He's just walked in. Okay, that's good."
It's good every time.
And that proves that's the smoking gun on how many times he's fucked around on Dolores.
Yeah.
Oh, we should wrap and let this man go back to his life. Dave, we've covered about half my cards, so we'll have to do this again down the road. This
was fun, and I haven't really seen you much since that. I gotta tell you, I'm a big fan, and I love to laugh. And when you do this for a living, there aren't very many people that can make me laugh, and you're one of them. And I've always loved you. So
wow,
keep it up.
Keep up the good stuff.
What a nice thing.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, we have some fun episodes you'd enjoy listening to, Dave, with Stephen Wright and Einstein and people like that, and Buck.
Oh, yeah?
We'll share them with you.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and somebody's going to tell Richard Lewis to get off Larry David's show because he's looking so cadaverous. If you think Bob looked like Jack Frost, check out a recent episode of Curb with Richard Lewis. Oh my God.
That's the ultimate insult. That he looks older than, more pathetic than Bob Hope.
Honestly, it's insane. Did you see them wheel Kirk Douglas out last night?
Oh
Yes.
my God.
Yes. Yeah.
I wish they hadn't done that.
Yeah. It's just.
He looked so horrible. It was just 101, and you go 101. I would say 130, more like it. He's lying about his age.
He's had some work done.
It shows you the terrible job that gravity does on just pushing us into the ground when we get really old.
Because you were looking at him going, I mean, I know what Kirk Douglas looks like. And
Yeah.
that doesn't look anything like Kirk Douglas.
My wife said when they put the mic down for him to speak, he should have said, "Putting on the Ritz." Like the monster and Young Frankenstein.
He would have said it like this. Could understand him. And if your interpreter is Catherine Zeta-Jones and she can't understand you, got problems.
Yeah, and there was a coxman in his day, Kirk Douglas,
Oh, yeah.
looking at him in that shape and just.
This is not a business for old people, which is why I'm glad I've gone behind the scenes and I'm writing now. I did a movie called White Coats. It was a hospital movie, and there was me, one scene with me, Dave Foley, and then another guy who's kind of like looks a little bit like Dave Foley, only he's a lot younger, like a decade younger, and his name's Peter Oldring. I was director, and I let them watch the playbacks and make their decision if we want to do another take. And we looked at the take, and Foley looks at it and he goes, "Oh God." And I said, "What?" He said, when I think of myself, and even sometimes when I look at myself in the mirror, I think I look more like Peter. But when I see myself on the monitor like this, I realize I look like Dave." And it was a real reminder that, you know what, it's time to just stop going on camera,
All right. Well, next time we'll do it again, Dave. If you're willing to have us again, and we'll do the Clee story, and we'll talk about we didn't get to Candy or Ramus or any of that good stuff, and we'll do it next time.
Okay.
And you want to wrap, Mr. G? What do you think?
Yeah. Well, first, I just want you to know, if they ever plan, I want you to keep my number. If they ever plan on doing a sequel to The Experts, I'm available.
Okay.
We've been talking to the great Dave Thomas.
What a show. Dave, can't thank you enough. Thanks for putting up with us this long.
I enjoyed it.
All right, man. We'll talk again soon.